My name is David Collins, and if you see me today, you'll probably think I'm just another man forgotten by the world. You might walk past me on the street, avoiding my eyes, pulling your coat tighter as if my presence is something dangerous. To most, I'm invisible, a man with nothing but a worn jacket, an empty stomach, and a cardboard sign. But I wasn't always this way. Once, I had a home. I had a wife I believed in and a best friend I trusted like a brother. I had a life that seemed solid, steady, unshakable. I never imagined that the two people closest to me would be the ones to tear it apart. But that's the truth, and it's the reason I'm here, sitting on sidewalks instead of in the living room I once called mine. I was born and raised in Ohio, in a working-class family. My father drove delivery trucks, and my mother worked part-time at a school cafeteria. We didn't have much, but we had each other. They taught me the value of honesty, hard work, and loyalty. I carried those lessons into adulthood, believing they'd guide me through life. In my early 20s, I met Claire. She had brown hair that caught the sun like copper and eyes that could stop me mid-sentence. We met at a diner, of all places. She spilled coffee on me while rushing between tables. And instead of being upset, I laughed. She apologized 100 times, but I told her it was the best accident of my life. I meant it. Claire and I dated for 2 years before we got married. It wasn't a fancy wedding, just close friends, family, and a borrowed church hall, but it was perfect. When she walked down the aisle in her simple white dress, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I promised her that day I'd always take care of her, that no matter what storms came, we'd face them together. Around that same time, I grew closer to a man named Eric. He and I had gone to high school together, but our real friendship started when we ended up working at the same construction company. Eric was funny, quick with a joke, and he had a way of making even the hardest day feel lighter. We became inseparable, like brothers who shared more than blood could ever bind. Life felt good then. Claire and I rented a small house, nothing fancy, but it was warm and filled with laughter. Eric came by often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to watch the game. Claire liked him too, maybe a little too much, though at the time I didn't see it. I thought we were the perfect trio, husband, wife, best friend. I worked hard. Long days on construction sites left me bone tired. But coming home to Claire made it worth it. She'd greet me with a smile, dinner waiting on the stove, and I'd think, this is everything I ever wanted. Sometimes Eric joined us, and we'd sit around the table, joking, laughing, talking about the future. I trusted them both completely. If there were cracks in that picture, I was blind to them. Maybe I didn't want to see. I believed in loyalty too much, in love too deeply. I thought Claire's vows and Eric's friendship were unshakable. That kind of trust feels solid until the day it crumbles and you realize it was fragile all along. Looking back now, I can see little things I ignored. The way Claire's eyes lingered on Eric when he told a story. The quick glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. The excuses she made to see him even when I wasn't around. At the time, I brushed it off as imagination. After all, they were two of the people I trusted most in the world. What reason did I have to doubt them? But the truth was already growing like a shadow beneath my feet. That truth would destroy everything. My marriage, my friendship, and the life I thought I had built on solid ground. And it would leave me here, a man without a home, telling my story to anyone willing to listen. My name is David Collins, and this is how I lost everything. For years, I believed I had built something solid, something that couldn't be shaken by whispers or doubts. My days were long, filled with the grind of construction work, but when I came home at night, I thought I was stepping into the kind of life every man dreams of. Our little house in Columbus wasn't much to look at, but it was ours. The rent was manageable, and we filled the space with secondhand furniture and photographs of vacations we could barely afford. To me, it wasn't about the size of the house or the shine of the furniture. It was about Claire's smile when she decorated the living room with flowers, or the way she painted the bedroom walls in soft blue, saying it felt like the ocean she had always wanted to see. Claire and I had our routines. She worked at a local clinic, filing paperwork and managing appointments, while I came home each evening smelling of dust and sweat. I'd toss my boots by the door, and she'd kiss my cheek, sometimes teasing, "You smell like the whole site followed you home." We'd laugh, sit down to dinner, and share stories of our days. Those moments, I thought, were the glue that held us together. Eric was often part of that rhythm. He lived only a few streets away, and it seemed natural for him to stop by after work. Sometimes he brought a six-pack, sometimes just his easy grin and a story to tell. We'd sit around the table, the three of us, like some kind of family unit. Claire would laugh at his jokes, her eyes lighting up in a way that always made me happy. I never thought twice about it. After all, Eric was my best friend. We even took trips together. I remember one summer when the three of us drove down to Kentucky Lake. We camped in a borrowed tent, grilled hot dogs over a fire, and stayed up late telling stories under the stars. Claire said it was one of the best weekends of her life, and I believed her. In my heart, I thought I had it all. A wife who loved me, a friend who had my back, and a life that felt steady. The truth is, I measured my happiness by how hard I worked. The more hours I put in, the better I felt about providing for Claire. I told myself that if I came home tired, it was proof of love. But what I didn't see was how those long hours also left gaps. Gaps where doubt, temptation, and betrayal could slip in unnoticed. On Fridays, Eric and I would sometimes stop by a bar before heading home. He'd slap me on the back and say, "David, you are the only guy I'd trust with my life." I'd grin and tell him he was like the brother I never had. Those words meant something to me. I didn't just trust him, I believed in him. Claire and I talked about starting a family. We dreamed about a bigger house someday, maybe with a yard for kids to play in. She cut out pictures from magazines of nurseries, showing me colors she liked. I promised her that when the time was right, we'd make it happen. Looking into her eyes, I thought I saw the same dreams reflected back. The life I thought I had was one of stability, loyalty, and love. I never questioned it because questioning would have felt like betrayal in itself. I didn't snoop through her phone. I didn't second-guess Eric when he stayed late to help Claire with chores while I was on double shifts. Trust was the foundation of everything we built, or so I believed. There were moments, though, that should have raised alarms. Nights when Claire seemed distracted, her smile a little forced. Days when Eric seemed to avoid my eyes, brushing off questions with quick jokes. Once, I came home early from work and found them sitting close together on the couch, laughing at something on her phone. They jumped apart the second I walked in. "Just a funny video," Claire said quickly, her cheeks pink. I laughed it off. Why wouldn't I? They were the two people I trusted most. Trust can be the cruelest blindfold. When I think back on those days now, I realize how fragile it all was. The life I thought I had was built not on unshakable ground, but on sand, ready to wash away the moment the tide turned. At the time, though, I believed with everything in me. I believed in my wife. I believed in my best friend. And I believed in a future we would all somehow share, woven together in ways I didn't fully understand, but never doubted. That belief kept me going through long shifts, aching muscles, and sleepless nights. It carried me through storms and struggles. But belief, I would learn, isn't always enough to save you from betrayal. Looking back, the warning signs were there. They weren't big at first, just tiny fractures, easy to ignore if you didn't want to see them. And I didn't want to see them. I thought love and loyalty were enough to make everything unshakable. But even the strongest looking walls can hide cracks beneath the paint. It started with Claire's silences. She used to talk about everything, her day at work, her frustrations, her little triumphs. She'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, coffee in her hands, and her words would pour out like a stream. But one day I realized the stream had slowed. When I asked how her day went, she'd shrug. Fine. When I pressed for more, she'd change the subject. I told myself she was tired. Everyone gets tired. Eric, too, seemed different. He was still around, still cracking jokes, but sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him watching Claire. Not in the way a friend watches. There was something heavier in his eyes, something that made me shift uncomfortably, though I couldn't explain why. Once, during a football game at our place, I went to grab beers from the kitchen. When I came back, their laughter stopped abruptly, like a door slamming shut. Claire's cheeks were flushed, Eric's eyes fixed on the screen. I brushed it off. They were close because of me, I reasoned. What harm was in that? The cracks widened in small, ordinary ways. Claire started dressing up more often, even when she said she was just running errands. She wore perfume I hadn't smelled in years, a scent she used to save for special occasions. I teased her about it once was to, "Who are you trying to impress at the grocery store?" And she laughed too quickly, brushing me off. Late nights became more frequent. I'd come home from double shifts, expecting to find her curled on the couch with a book. Instead, the house was dark, empty. She'd come home hours later saying she'd been at a friend's or helping at the clinic. Her explanations were smooth, believable enough if you didn't want to doubt. And I didn't want to doubt. Doubt felt like betrayal, and I still believed my love for her and her love for me was unbreakable. Eric's excuses grew too. He missed work sometimes, claiming car trouble or the flu, yet when I saw him, he looked fine. Once I drove past a cafe on my lunch break and thought I glimpsed him through the window, sitting with someone who looked familiar. I slowed down, but traffic pushed me forward, and by the time I circled back, the booth was empty. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. The truth is, I didn't want to imagine what those cracks meant. I clung to the belief that my wife and my best friend were the two people I could trust without question. My parents had raised me on the idea that loyalty was sacred. To doubt them felt like doubting myself, doubting the very foundation of my life. So I ignored the cracks, plastered over them with trust, and kept building a future I thought was secure. But cracks don't disappear just because you look away. They spread. The distance between Claire and me grew wider. We still shared a bed, but there was a coldness in her touch, an absence in her eyes when she looked at me. We ate dinner together, but the conversations were shallow, rehearsed. I began to feel like a guest in my own home, sitting across from a woman who smiled politely but no longer reached for my hand. Eric stopped coming around as often, at least when I was there. When he did, he seemed restless, tapping his fingers against the table, checking his phone. Once, I caught him staring at me with an expression I couldn't name, something between guilt and defiance. It unsettled me, but I buried the feeling. He was my friend. Friends didn't betray each other. Still, the unease gnawed at me. I started noticing things I couldn't explain. A jacket that wasn't mine draped over a chair. Two coffee mugs in the sink when I'd been gone all day. The faint scent of Eric's cologne lingering in the hallway even though I hadn't seen him in days. Each time, I came up with explanations. Maybe Claire had borrowed the jacket. Maybe she'd made extra coffee. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew. The life I thought I had wasn't as solid as I believed. The foundation was cracking, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. I tried to patch it with denial, with trust, with the blind hope that love and friendship were stronger than temptation. But cracks only spread. And soon the truth waiting in the shadows would burst into the open, shattering everything I believed about loyalty, about love, and about the two people I trusted most. The day the truth came out didn't arrive with a dramatic thunderclap. It wasn't some movie scene where everything unraveled in a single moment. No, it came quietly, like a knife slipped between the ribs when you aren't looking. And yet, the cut was deep enough to bleed me dry. It was a Thursday, I remember, because Thursdays were usually simple, long hours at the site, then home to dinner with Claire. I had been working a double shift, the kind that left my muscles screaming and my eyelids heavy. All I wanted was to get home, shower, and sit down to a hot meal. But when I walked through the door that night, the house felt wrong. The lights were low, the air smelled faintly of Eric's cologne, sharp, unmistakable. My boots stuck to the floor where someone had spilled wine. I called out, "Claire?" But my voice sounded hollow in the silence. I walked into the living room and stopped dead. Claire was there. So was Eric. They weren't laughing at a joke or watching the game. They weren't sitting apart the way friends do. They were close, too close. Her hair was tousled, his shirt half buttoned, and the look on their faces was enough to confirm what my heart already knew, but my mind had refused to believe. For a long second, no one moved. The three of us just stared at each other, the weight of years of trust collapsing between us. Then Eric stood, guilt flashing across his face before it hardened into something else. Defiance, maybe? Or cowardice? Claire's lips parted, but no words came. I remember my hands shaking, not from exhaustion, but from rage and disbelief. How long? My voice cracked like dry wood. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Eric looked away. The silence was louder than any answer. How long? I demanded again. Louder this time, my chest heaving. Finally, Claire whispered, "It just happened." Her voice was thin, trembling. "I didn't mean for it to, David." Neither of us did. Didn't mean for it to? Those words felt like poison. You don't just happen into betraying your husband with his best friend. You make choices. Small ones maybe, at first, but choices all the same. And each choice is a crack, widening, until finally the whole foundation gives way. Eric tried to speak. "Man, I never wanted—" "Don't." My voice was raw, jagged. "Don't you dare speak to me. You were my brother. I trusted you with with her." The room spun. My legs felt unsteady, like the ground was buckling. I wanted to throw something, to break every reminder of the life I thought I had. But all I could do was stand there, staring at the two people I had built my world around, and realize that world was gone. Claire reached for me, tears streaming down her face. "David, please, I'm sorry." I stepped back, my voice hollow. "Sorry doesn't change what you've done." I wish I could say I stormed out with dignity, but the truth is I stumbled like a man gut shot, clutching at the walls as though they might hold me up. Outside, the night air hit me like ice. My chest ached, my breath came in ragged bursts, and all I could think was, it's over. Everything is over. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my truck in some empty parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Memories assaulted me. Wedding vows, dinners with Eric, plans for the future, each one twisted into something ugly. I thought of Claire in her white dress, promising forever. I thought of Eric clapping me on the back, telling me I was his brother. And now those promises, those words, were nothing but lies. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. They hadn't only broken vows, they'd broken the very idea of trust. The two people I had believed would stand by me through anything had chosen each other instead, leaving me outside alone. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, that maybe they'd regret it and things could go back to how they were. But every time I stepped into that house, the air was different. Claire couldn't meet my eyes. Eric stopped coming by altogether, which was its own confession. The laughter that once filled our rooms was gone, replaced by silence so heavy it suffocated me. Eventually, Claire packed a bag. She didn't say where she was going. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes told me everything. She had chosen him. My wife had chosen my best friend, and I was left standing in the ruins of a life I thought was solid, staring at the pieces with no idea how to put them back together. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your sense of self. It makes you question everything, your worth, your judgment, your very identity. Who was I, if not Claire's husband? Who was I, if not Eric's friend? I didn't have an answer then. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, and I had no idea what would rise from the ashes of what they destroyed. Betrayal is like a crack in glass. It starts small, then spreads until the whole pane shatters. Once I knew the truth about Claire and Eric, there was no holding the pieces together. My life, once built on love and loyalty, collapsed faster than I could grasp it. The first thing I lost was my home, not in a flood or a fire, but in a quieter, crueler way. When Claire walked out the door with her suitcase, it was as though she'd taken the walls with her. I still lived inside those rooms, but the warmth was gone. The kitchen where we'd shared meals was cold. The bed we'd shared felt like stone. Even the photos on the walls seemed to mock me, frozen smiles of a life that no longer existed. Bills piled up. I had spent years pouring myself into work, trying to give Claire the life she wanted. But now, with her gone, the weight of responsibility pressed down harder. Rent was due, utilities kept climbing, and without her income from the clinic, I struggled to keep up. Nights found me at the kitchen table, staring at overdue notices, the silence of the house pressing in like a tomb. Work became harder too. I was exhausted, not just in my body, but in my soul. Swinging a hammer, hauling lumber, taking orders from the foreman, it all felt meaningless. Before, I worked for something, to provide for Claire, to build a future. Now, each paycheck was just a reminder of what I had lost. I started missing shifts. My foreman pulled me aside more than once, warning me to get my head straight. But how could I when my heart had been ripped out? Then came the drinking. At first, it was just a beer after work, a way to numb the ache. But one became two, then five, then bottles of cheap whiskey that burned my throat and dulled the edges of my thoughts. I told myself I deserved it, that after all I'd endured, I had earned the right to forget for a few hours. But alcohol doesn't erase pain. It just delays it, pushing it into the morning with twice the weight. Eric stayed out of sight. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to take back what he had stolen. But another part of me couldn't bear to look him in the eye. The man I once called my brother had betrayed me in the deepest way possible. If I saw him, I didn't trust myself not to lash out, to let all the rage boiling in me spill over. So I avoided him, avoided the places we used to go together. Still, the city felt smaller, and I knew I'd cross his path eventually. When Claire finally came back to the house, it wasn't to reconcile. It was to collect the rest of her things. She didn't come alone. She brought Eric with her. I can still see them standing in my doorway, like strangers trespassing on my life. She avoided my gaze as she packed her clothes, our wedding album, even the dishes we had picked out together. Eric carried boxes silently, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg. I wanted to ask why my love, my loyalty, my years of devotion weren't enough. But the words stuck in my throat. I watched them strip my house bare, and with every item they carried out, another piece of me vanished. After that, the house became unbearable. Empty rooms echoed with memories I couldn't face. I stopped paying rent. When the eviction notice came, I didn't fight it. I let the landlord change the locks, watching from the sidewalk as everything I had once called mine slipped out of reach. With no home, no wife, no friend, I drifted. I stayed in cheap motels when I could, borrowed couches from acquaintances when they offered, and sometimes just slept in my truck. But even my truck betrayed me eventually. Repairs piled up, and when I couldn't pay, it was repossessed. Another piece of my life gone. Debt collectors started calling. I had maxed out credit cards trying to stay afloat, using one to pay another until the whole fragile system collapsed. Letters arrived daily, bold red words shouting past due and final notice. I stopped opening them. What was the point? I had nothing left to give. Family turned their backs too. Some said they couldn't take me in because they didn't have space. Others said it was because of my drinking, or because they didn't want to get in the middle of my mess. Friends faded away, uncomfortable with my pain, unwilling to face the truth of how quickly life can crumble. Piece by piece, I lost it all. The home, the work, the trust, the people I thought would never leave. And when everything was gone, when every door had closed, the streets were all that remained. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd find a way back. But deep down, I knew the truth. Once betrayal takes root, it grows like a weed, choking out everything until there's nothing left. I had lost Claire, I had lost Eric, and with them, I had lost myself. When Claire left for good, she didn't just take her clothes and her photographs. She took the soul of the house with her. The rooms were still there, the furniture sat in its place, but everything felt hollow, like the shell of a life that had already ended. I remember walking from room to room after she and Eric carried the last box out. Each step echoed too loudly. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her cooking, onions and garlic from the last dinner we shared. But the stove was cold, the counters bare. The living room still had the couch, the one we bought secondhand and laughed about because it squeaked every time we sat down together. Now it squeaked for no one. The bedroom was the hardest. The bed was stripped, the closet half empty. Her perfume lingered in the air like a ghost, reminding me that she had once lain beside me, whispered dreams into the dark. I opened the dresser drawer where she kept her jewelry, only to find it empty. Even the small trinkets, the necklace I bought her on our first anniversary, the bracelet she said she'd never take off, were gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the emptiness, and felt the walls closing in. The silence was unbearable. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the refrigerator reminded me that I was alone. I tried turning on the TV just to drown out the quiet, but even the noise sounded hollow. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining the life that used to fill this space. I saw Claire moving through the kitchen, laughing at something Eric said. I heard the echo of conversations long gone. I imagined footsteps on the stairs, the jingle of keys in the lock. But when I blinked, there was nothing, only shadows. I started avoiding the house during the day. I'd leave early, wandering the streets, sitting in bars until closing time, doing anything to delay going back to those empty rooms. When I finally stumbled home, the emptiness was even heavier, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The more I tried to escape it, the stronger it became. Neighbors noticed the change. Mrs. Dalton, the older woman next door, would wave when I left in the morning. Her eyes were full of pity, and I hated it. Once she tried to bring me a casserole, saying, "You shouldn't be alone so much." I thanked her, but the gesture stung. I didn't want her kindness. I wanted my life back. As the weeks went by, the house itself began to fall apart. I stopped caring about the little things. Dishes piled up in the sink. Dust settled on the shelves. The lawn grew wild, weeds climbing higher with each passing day. The landlord sent notices about upkeep, but I ignored them. What did it matter? The house wasn't a home anymore. It was just four walls trapping me inside my grief. I remember one night sitting in the living room, the lights off, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table. The rain pounded against the windows, and I thought about the first storm Claire and I had weathered together in that very room. We lit candles, played cards, and laughed at the thunder. That night in the dark, I realized I had lost more than just her. I had lost the future we were supposed to have. Memories haunted every corner. The swing Eric and I had built in the backyard still hung from the old oak tree. I couldn't look at it without hearing Claire's laughter as she tried it out, squealing like a kid. The porch, once a place where we dreamed about growing old together, became a place where I sat alone, chain smoking until the sun came up. The empty house mirrored what was happening inside me. Just as the walls were bare, so was my heart. Just as the rooms were lifeless, so was my spirit. Each day I spent there, the emptiness grew until I could no longer tell where the house ended and I began. Eventually the bills caught up. I couldn't pay the rent, couldn't keep the lights on. Notices piled up on the front door, each one a reminder of how far I had fallen. When the final eviction came, I didn't fight it. I packed what little I had left, some clothes, a few tools, a box of photographs I couldn't bear to throw away, and walked out the door for the last time. I paused on the porch, looking back at the house that had once been filled with love and laughter. Now it was just an empty shell, like me. Losing Claire had shattered me. Losing Eric had gutted me. But losing the house, losing the place where our lives had unfolded, that was the final blow. It wasn't just a house. It was every memory, every promise, every dream we once shared. And now it was gone. After I walked out of that empty house for the last time, I thought the worst was already behind me. I had lost my wife, my best friend, in the place I once called home. But what I didn't realize was that the spiral had only just begun. When you're broken, it's easy to reach for something, anything, that promises a little relief, even if it's poison in disguise. For me, that poison came in a bottle. At first, drinking was just a way to get through the nights. The silence was unbearable, and the weight of betrayal pressed down until I thought my chest would crack. A couple of beers turned into whiskey, and whiskey turned into whole bottles emptied in one sitting. The burn in my throat was nothing compared to the burn in my heart, and for a few hours I could forget. I told myself I was in control. I told myself I could stop whenever I wanted. But the truth was, the alcohol wasn't just numbing the pain. It was feeding it. The more I drank, the more I lost. Work slipped through my fingers next. Construction had always been demanding, but now I couldn't keep up. I showed up late, sometimes still reeking of last night's binge. My hands shook when I held a hammer. My focus was gone, my energy drained. I started missing shifts, lying about being sick, making excuses that fooled no one. My foreman called me into his office one day, his face grim. David, I've tried to be patient, he said, but you're not the man you used to be. If you can't pull it together, I can't keep you on the crew. I promised him I'd do better, and maybe I meant it in that moment. But promises mean little when you're drowning. Within weeks, I was fired. Without a paycheck, the debts piled higher. Rent at the motel I'd been staying in went unpaid. Credit cards I had used to cover bills ballooned with interest. Collection notices arrived in thick stacks, each one shouting in bold red letters that I was falling deeper. I stopped opening them, letting envelopes pile up like tombstones of a life I couldn't resurrect. The worst part wasn't just the money, it was the shame. Bill collectors left messages on my phone, their voices sharp, demanding. Friends I once borrowed from stopped answering my calls. I felt like a leech, draining everyone around me. I stopped reaching out altogether, too embarrassed to admit how far I had fallen. Alcohol promised escape, but it delivered chains. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into nights. I lost track of days, measuring time only by the emptiness of bottles around me. I pawned what little I had left, my tools, my watch, even the wedding band I had once vowed never to take off. Each pawn ticket felt like another nail in the coffin of who I used to be. Sometimes in my haze, I thought about Claire and Eric. Were they together? Were they happy? Did they ever think of me at all? Those thoughts twisted the knife deeper, and I'd drink until I couldn't think anymore. Other times, I stared at old photographs, my vision blurred, wondering how a man who once had everything could end up with nothing. Debt collectors eventually stopped calling, not because I paid them, but because there was nothing left to take. My bank account was empty, my credit ruined, my belongings gone. When the motel manager finally told me I had to leave, I didn't fight. I packed my last bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out with no destination in mind. That was the day I crossed the invisible line between having a place to stay and being homeless. One moment I was a man down on his luck. The next I was a man with nowhere to go. Alcohol followed me onto the streets. I begged for change, not for food, but for another drink to numb the cold nights. Some gave me coins, others sneered. A few told me to get it well. They didn't know I once had one. They didn't know how betrayal and loss had stripped me bare. To them, I was just another drunk on the sidewalk. Debt was no longer just about money. It was about everything I owed to the life I had wasted, the love I didn't protect, the trust I misplaced, the responsibilities I abandoned. Each step I took felt like walking deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. I had lost my home. I had lost my job. I had lost myself to the bottle. And worst of all, I had lost the will to believe there was a way back. There's a saying that when one door closes, another opens. But when you're broken, drunk, and carrying the weight of betrayal, it feels like every door slams shut at once, and the sound echoes long after. When the motel manager kicked me out, I thought maybe I could lean on family for a while. My sister lived 2 towns over with her husband and 2 kids. We hadn't been especially close in recent years, but blood is blood, right? I called her from a payphone, my hands trembling as I fed in the coins. When she answered, I poured out my story, how Claire had left, how Eric had betrayed me, how I lost my job and now had nowhere to go. There was silence on the line for a long time before she finally said, "David, I wish we could help, but things are really tight right now. The kids need their space and, well, I don't think it would work." Her voice cracked with guilt, but her words hit like a hammer. I told her I understood, hung up the phone, and stared at the receiver in my hand until the dial tone went dead. Next, I tried an old coworker, Mark. We had built houses together, poured sweat into concrete side by side. If anyone would understand, I thought it would be him. When I showed up at his doorstep, his wife opened the door. The moment she saw me, haggard, unshaven, smelling of stale whiskey, her smile froze. "Mark's not home," she said quickly, though I could hear his voice in the background. She shut the door before I could say another word. I stood there on the porch, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking dishes inside. The warmth of family life spilled through the windows, but I was locked out of it, staring through the glass like a ghost. I tried churches too. Some offered meals, a cot for the night, maybe a prayer. Others shook their heads, their resources stretched thin. A pastor once told me, "The Lord helps those who help themselves." I nodded politely, but inside I wanted to scream. How could I help myself when I had nothing left to build with? Everywhere I turned, the message was the same. Not here. Not now. Not you. The rejection cut deeper than hunger, deeper than cold. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. Cold pierced my skin, but rejection hollowed me out from the inside. Each closed door told me I wasn't wanted, that I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Friends I had once trusted crossed the street to avoid me. Some muttered excuses about being busy, others simply ignored me. Even the ones who listened did so with eyes that darted around, looking for a way to end the conversation. No one wanted to carry the weight of my story. No one wanted the reminder that life could collapse so quickly. One evening, desperate, I knocked on the door of my parents' old house. They had passed years ago, and a distant cousin had taken it over. I stood there, rain dripping down my face, clutching the last suitcase I owned. When he opened the door, he didn't even hesitate. "David, you can't stay here," he said flatly. "We've got our own problems. You need to figure things out." Then he shut the door in my face. I sat on the porch steps for hours, the rain soaking me through, until finally I accepted the truth. I had no doors left to knock on. That night I wandered until I found myself at the edge of the city. I curled up under an overpass, using my suitcase as pillow. Cars roared overhead, their headlights sweeping past, but no one saw me. No one cared. I was just another shadow in the dark. When morning came, I walked the streets with blistered feet and empty pockets. I passed rows of houses, each one with curtains drawn, children's toys scattered in the yards, the smell of breakfast wafting through open windows. Behind every door was a life, a family, warmth, love. But none of those doors were mine. None of them would open for me. The betrayal of Claire and Eric had taken my marriage, my friendship, my home. But the rejections that followed, that steady drumbeat of no from family, friends, even strangers, took something deeper. They took away hope. Hope needs open doors. Hope needs the belief that somewhere, someone will take you in. But all I saw were doors closed. And so I kept walking, each step heavier than the last, the weight of rejection pressing me closer and closer to the streets that were waiting to claim me. The first night I slept on the streets is burned into my memory like a brand. Until then, no matter how bad things got, I'd always had a roof, whether it was the house I once called mine, a motel room I barely afforded, or a couch borrowed from someone who pitied me. But the night I laid my head on cold concrete for the first time, I crossed a line I never thought I'd reach. It was late autumn. The air carried that sharp bite, the kind that sneaks into your bones and makes your teeth chatter even before the sun sets. I had nowhere left to go. Every couch had been pulled away. Every door had been closed. Every favor spent. I wandered the city for hours, clutching the small suitcase that still held the last scraps of my life. Some clothes, a few photographs, a pair of work boots too worn to wear on site. I ended up at the edge of a public park. The benches were already claimed by men whose faces were lined with years of struggle. They nodded at me briefly, then turned back into themselves, curling tighter against the cold. I walked further until I found an alcove near a library, its doorway deep enough to shield me from the wind. That's where I set my bag down. That's where I sat, knees pulled to my chest, heart pounding at the thought of what I was about to do. I tried to tell myself it was just one night until I figured things out. But deep down, I knew this wasn't temporary. This was the new reality clawing its way into my life. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound startled me awake. The shuffle of footsteps, the slam of a car door, the siren wailing in the distance. The concrete was unforgiving, leaching the warmth from my body. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Worst of all was the shame. Lying there in the shadows, I felt exposed, less than human. I wasn't David Collins, the husband, or the friend, or the worker anymore. I was just another homeless man, anonymous and discarded. Morning came slowly, the gray light creeping into my alcove. I stood stiffly, my body aching from the night's cold, my clothes damp with dew. People walked past on their way to work, barely glancing at me. I wanted to shout, I had a life once. I'm not just this. But I kept quiet, swallowing the lump in my throat. That first night became the first of many. The streets are a cruel teacher, but they teach fast. You learn which alleys are safest, which shelters fill up first, which corners bring in enough change to buy a sandwich. You learn to hide your belongings because theft isn't rare. It's expected. You learn to make yourself small, invisible, because visibility makes you a target. Food became whatever I could find. Some days I waited in line at soup kitchens, clutching a tray of watery stew and stale bread like it was a feast. Other days I dug through dumpsters behind grocery stores, searching for bruised fruit or half-eaten sandwiches tossed away by people who never thought twice about them. Hunger stopped being an occasional discomfort. It became a constant companion. Nights blurred together. Sometimes I found a cot in a shelter, other times I curled up under bridges, cardboard my only mattress. The cold sank deeper as winter approached. I wrapped myself in layers of clothes, most scavenged from donation bins, but it was never enough. I woke with numb fingers, lips cracked and bleeding, breath visible in the air. Worse than the cold, worse than the hunger, was the look in people's eyes, when they looked at me at all. Some stared with pity, others with disgust, but most didn't look at all. They stepped around me as if I were an obstacle in their path. To them, I wasn't a man with a story, with a heart broken by betrayal. I was just another faceless reminder of what could happen if life collapsed. I found fragments of community among others on the streets. Men and women with stories as heavy as mine, war veterans, addicts, people abandoned by families just like I had been. We shared food when we had it, warmth when the nights grew unbearable, silence when words were too heavy. In their company, I found a small, fragile sense of belonging, though it wasn't the belonging I'd lost. Still, even with them, the shame clung to me. I thought of Claire, of Eric, of the life that had been stolen from me. Were they together somewhere warm, laughing while I shivered in an alley? The thought gnawed at me, twisting the knife deeper each time it surfaced. From a bed to the streets, it happened faster than I ever believed possible. One moment I was lying in my own home, dreaming of a future with the woman I loved. The next, I was curled on cold pavement, a broken man clutching a suitcase that held nothing but remnants of a life already gone. And the cruelest part? The world kept moving. Cars still honked, people still laughed, buildings still gleamed in the sun. My life had shattered, but the city didn't notice. That was when I realized the streets weren't just a place, they were a sentence, and I was serving mine, one night at a time. The strange thing about living on the streets is how you can be surrounded by people yet feel completely unseen. The sidewalks are full of faces, the buses packed, the markets buzzing, but for someone like me, it's as though I don't exist. I sit on a corner, knees pulled to my chest, and thousands of feet pass me by. Shoes polished, shoes muddy, sneakers, high heels, they all blur together. What doesn't blur is the fact that not a single pair ever stops. At first, I tried to make eye contact. I thought if someone looked into my eyes, they might see me as more than just a man slumped against a wall. Maybe they'd see the husband I once was, the worker who built homes with his hands, the friend who once shared beers and laughter. But most people avoided my gaze. Their eyes slid past me like I was a shadow. Invisible, that's what I had become. There's a pain in invisibility that goes deeper than hunger or cold. Hunger gnaws at your belly, cold bites at your skin, but being unseen eats away at your soul. When nobody acknowledges you, you start to question if you even exist anymore. I'd press my palm against my chest just to feel my heart beating, to remind myself I was still alive. I remember one afternoon sitting outside a coffee shop. The smell of roasted beans drifted through the air, making my stomach twist with longing. Inside, people laughed, sipping lattes, typing on laptops, planning futures. I pressed my back against the brick wall, holding out a paper cup. Not a single person dropped in a coin. One woman glanced at me, her expression tightening, before she pulled her child closer and hurried inside. I wasn't a man to her. I was a warning. The worst moments came when I recognized people from my old life. Once, I saw a guy I used to work construction with. He walked out of a hardware store, his arms full of supplies. his face flushed with the energy of a man still moving forward. For a split second, our eyes met. Recognition flickered across his face. Then he looked away and kept walking, his pace quickening. That hurt more than if he'd spit at me. It told me I wasn't just invisible to strangers. I was invisible to people who once knew me. I tried holding signs. Sometimes they said hungry. Sometimes anything helps. Once, in desperation, I wrote, I was betrayed by my wife and best friend. I lost everything, but even that didn't matter. People glanced at the cardboard, their faces unreadable, before turning away. My story was too heavy for them. They wanted to get to work, to get home, to live their lives without thinking about how quickly everything could unravel. Being invisible among crowds changes you. I stopped trying to be seen. I pulled my hood lower, kept my head down, blended into the alleys and doorways. It felt safer that way. If no one looked at me, then no one could judge me, pity me, or reject me again. But invisibility has a cost. The less people saw me, the less I saw myself. I stopped shaving, stopped caring about the stains on my clothes, stopped thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow didn't matter. Tomorrow would be the same as today. Me on a corner watching the world pass me by. Yet in the middle of all that, there were moments that pierced through. A little boy once tugged on his father's sleeve as they walked past me. "Why is that man sitting there?" he asked, his voice innocent. The father muttered something I couldn't hear and pulled him along. But for a second, the boy's wide eyes stayed on me. He saw me. Just for that heartbeat of a moment, I existed again. Sometimes a stranger would hand me a sandwich or a cup of coffee. They didn't ask for my story, didn't linger, but their small act reminded me I was still human enough to deserve food, warmth, kindness. I clung to those moments. They were rare, but they kept the last flicker of hope alive. Still, most days, I was just part of the scenery, like the trash can on the corner, or the lamppost that flickered at night. People noticed me only when I got in their way. I learned to shrink myself smaller, to take up less space, to fold into the background. Invisible among crowds, that's what betrayal, loss, and the streets had made me. A man erased not by death, but by indifference, and yet, in the quiet of the night, when the crowds were gone and the streets were still, I whispered my own name, David Collins. I repeated it over and over, like a prayer, like a reminder. Because if the world refused to see me, I had to see myself. I had to believe I was still here. Memories are strange things. They come when you least expect them, sometimes as comfort, sometimes as punishment. On the streets, with nothing but time and silence, memories became both my torment and my lifeline. I would sit under a bridge, the cold wind cutting through my jacket, and suddenly I'd see Claire's face as clearly as if she were standing in front of me. I'd hear her laugh, the one that bubbled up when she found something truly funny, not just polite. I'd remember the way she leaned into me when we watched TV, her head resting on my shoulder, her hand tracing circles on my arm. Those images warmed me for a moment, until the realization hit. She wasn't here anymore. She had chosen someone else. My best friend. Eric's memory was worse. I used to think of him like a brother. We spent years sweating side by side on construction sites, trading jokes and complaints, sharing beers after long days. He was the man I trusted with everything, the one who knew my secrets, my fears, my dreams. I never doubted that he'd stand by me no matter what. Now, when I thought of him, it was with a bitterness so sharp it made my stomach twist. His grin, once a sign of camaraderie, now felt like mockery. His voice echoed in my mind, hollow with betrayal. Sometimes, though, the memories weren't bitter. They were sweet, and maybe that made them even more painful. I remembered the camping trip we took together, the three of us, Claire, Eric, and me. We sat around a fire, roasting marshmallows, laughing until our sides hurt. Claire leaned against me, and Eric strummed a guitar, singing badly but with enthusiasm. I thought we were the luckiest people in the world. That night under the stars, I believed nothing could break us. How foolish I was. On the streets, memories become a kind of currency. They're all you have left, so you spend them carefully, revisiting them when the loneliness is too sharp to bear. I'd replay the day of my wedding in my mind, hearing Claire say, "I do," feeling the squeeze of her hand in mine. I'd relive the nights Eric and I stayed up too late, talking about the future we both wanted, houses, kids, stability. But every memory ended the same way, with the crash of betrayal, the sting of loss. It's strange how memory works. It doesn't just recall what happened, it recreates the feelings too. When I thought of Claire, I didn't just see her face, I felt the warmth of her touch, the comfort of her presence. When I thought of Eric, I didn't just hear his voice. I felt the trust I once had in him, trust that now cut like a knife. There were nights when memories nearly broke me. I'd sit with my back against a wall, staring at the dark sky, and the weight of everything I'd lost pressed so hard on my chest that I could barely breathe. I'd whisper to myself, why did they do it? Why wasn't I enough? The questions had no answers, but asking them was the only way I knew to keep from drowning. Yet memories also kept me alive. They reminded me that I wasn't always this way. I wasn't always a man begging for change, shivering on a sidewalk. I had been loved once. I had been trusted once. I had been a man with a home, a wife, and a best friend. Even if those things were gone, the fact that they had existed gave me a thread of worth to hold on to. I began talking to Claire and Eric in my head. Not the real Claire and Eric, but the versions that lived in my memories. I'd tell Claire about the cold nights, about how much I missed her cooking. I'd tell Eric how much it hurt to be forgotten by someone I thought was family. These conversations were one-sided, but they filled the silence. They reminded me that I still had a voice, even if no one else wanted to hear it. The worst memory of all was the day I came home early and found them together. That image was carved into me, sharper than any knife. No matter how many bottles I drained, no matter how many nights I walked the streets, it followed me. Her guilty eyes, his hardened expression, the silence that said everything. I replayed it over and over as if by doing so I could change the ending. But it never changed. They always chose each other, and I was always left standing in the ruins. Still, even in the bitterness, there was a part of me that clung to the good. I couldn't erase the years of love I once felt, or the friendship that had once been real, even if it ended in betrayal. Those memories reminded me that I had lived, that I had mattered to someone once, and maybe, just maybe, they kept me from losing the last piece of myself completely. Because when the streets strip you of everything, your home, your pride, your place in the world, memories are what remain. They are both the chains that hold you down and the wings that keep you alive. And for me, they were all I had left. When a man loses everything, his home, his wife, his best friend, even the trust he built his life on, he's forced to ask the question no one wants to face. What remains of me? For months, I believed the answer was nothing. I walked the streets with my head down, invisible to the crowds, convinced that I was already gone. Not dead, maybe, but hollowed out, just a shell moving through the city. But time, cruel as it is, also has a way of forcing reflection. The longer I survived out here, the more I began to understand that not everything had been stripped away. Yes, betrayal had gutted me. Yes, loss had broken me. But even in the ruins, pieces of who I was still remained. What remained was my story. I may not have a roof over my head, but I carry the truth inside me. I carry the memory of who I was before the betrayal, the husband who believed in his vows, the friend who would have given his life for loyalty. I carry the laughter of nights around campfires, the comfort of hands once held, the pride of work done with sweat and skill. These things still live inside me, even if no one else can see them. What also remains is resilience. Every morning I wake on a park bench or in a shelter cot. Every night I survive the cold air cutting through thin blankets. I prove that I am not finished. The world may want to erase me, but I refuse to disappear. Each step I take, no matter how heavy, is an act of defiance against the betrayal that tried to bury me. There's dignity left in me too, though it's battered and scarred. People may look at me and see only failure, but I know better. I know that I once loved deeply. I know that I gave my trust freely. And though it was shattered, the willingness to love and trust is not weakness. It's proof that I still have a heart. Sometimes I sit under the stars and whisper Claire's name. I whisper Eric's too, though it tastes bitter on my tongue. I whisper not because I want them back, but because saying their names out loud reminds me that they were real, that I was real in those moments. They may have chosen each other, but that doesn't erase the years when they chose me. On the coldest nights, I clutch the few belongings I still carry, an old photograph, a worn jacket, scraps of the past, and I tell myself that I am still here. Because that's the truth. I am still here. The streets haven't killed me. The betrayal didn't finish me. The silence of closed doors didn't erase me. What remains of me is a man who refuses to be forgotten. I know I may never rebuild the life I lost. I may never have another home filled with laughter, another family to call mine, another friend I can trust without question. But I have my story, and as long as I can tell it, I still exist. Sometimes strangers stop. They hand me a cup of coffee or a sandwich, and for a brief moment, they look me in the eyes. In that flicker of connection, I feel seen again, human again. And I realize that even among the wreckage, there are still sparks of kindness in the world. The betrayal of my wife and my best friend broke me in ways I can't fully put into words. It stole the future I dreamed of and left me on sidewalks no one wants to walk near. But it didn't erase me. Because even now, when I sit in the cold with nothing but my memories, I can still whisper, "My name is David Collins. I was a husband. I was a friend. I was betrayed. But I remain. And that, I've learned, is enough. What remains of me is a man still breathing, still remembering, still speaking. What remains is my story. And no betrayal, no loss, no empty street can ever take that away."